Alaric, the king of the Visigoths, is best remembered for sacking Rome in 410. This pivotal event marked a significant milestone in the decline of the Western Roman Empire. However, Alaric's legacy is also tied to a fascinating mystery: the fate of the vast treasure he reportedly looted during his sacking of Rome. Alaric's rise to prominence occurred during a tumultuous period for the Roman Empire. By the late 4th century, the empire was split into eastern and western halves, both grappling with internal strife and external threats. Alaric initially served as a Roman military leader, but dissatisfaction with his treatment led him to rebel and assume leadership of the Visigoths. In 408, Alaric invaded Italy and laid siege to Rome multiple times, pressuring the city to pay large ransoms. The final siege in 410 culminated in the sacking of the city, an event that shocked the ancient world. Alaric's forces looted gold, silver, precious stones, and religious artifacts, including treasures from the Temple of Jerusalem, which had been brought to Rome after the fall of Jerusalem. Shortly after his conquest, Alaric died unexpectedly near Cosenza in southern Italy. According to legend, his followers buried him along with the treasure in the bed of the Busento River, temporarily diverting the water to conceal the grave. The workers who performed the burial were reportedly slain to ensure the secrecy of the location. The mystery of Alaric's treasure has inspired numerous theories ranging from plausible to somewhat fantastical. The most enduring theory is that Alaric and his treasure remain buried beneath the Busento River in Cosenza. While no substantial archaeological evidence has surfaced, the story persists in local lore. In recent years, Italian archaeologists and historians have proposed excavations near the river, but these efforts have yet to yield definitive results. Some scholars suggest that the treasure may have been hidden in the nearby Sila Mountains. The rugged terrain would have provided a secure location for the Visigoths to stash their loot, and the dense forest could have obscured the treasure's whereabouts for millennia. It's also plausible that the treasure was largely dispersed upon Alaric's death. The Visigoths faced constant challenges, including battles, migrations, and political upheaval. The treasure could have been used to fund these endeavors, gradually disappearing into the economies of the regions they occupied. If the treasure does remain, at this point the best chance of uncovering it is through the use of ground-penetrating radar technology. The story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin is among the most enduring and enigmatic legends of medieval Europe. It's said that in 1284, a mysterious stranger arrived in Hamelin, Germany, and used his magic pipe to first rid the town of rats. When the townspeople refused to pay him for his services, he then lured away the children from the town. While this legend has been told in stories and fairy tales, it also has a grounding in historical records that reference the sudden disappearance of Hamelin's children. Historically, the earliest known written reference to this event in Hamelin appears on a church window dating back to around 1300. This window reportedly depicted a piper leading a group of children out of the town. Unfortunately, this window was destroyed in 1660, and what we know of it comes only from older accounts. Other evidence includes a 14th century entry in the town's chronicles that reads, "It is 100 years since our children left," as well as references in various medieval manuscripts. Though these sources are fragmentary, they indicate that something significant indeed happened to Hamelin's children. The question that still dogs historians is simple: what actually took place? One popular theory, and arguably the one most tied to the fairy tale element, involves literal rat infestation. In the commonly told version of the story, rats invaded the town, causing destruction, disease, and panic. A colorfully dressed piper arrived, offered to get rid of the pests for a modest sum, and successfully led the rats to drown in a local river by playing his flute. When the townspeople refused to pay him, He sought revenge by doing the same with their children, leading them away, never to return. However, some historians point out that the earliest versions of the tale don't even mention rats, suggesting that the rat infestation may have been a later embellishment. This first mention of rats wasn't added in surviving texts until the 16th century, 3 centuries after the purported event. Now, of course, here I have to mention that this could just be survivorship bias in the source material. There may well have been earlier texts that mention the rats, but these texts may now be lost. It's also possible that the rat element was added to dramatize the story or give a moral lesson on keeping one's promises. After all, without the rat element, the lesson of keeping your word to those who assist you is completely lost, and instead it becomes a narrative about not trusting strangers or outsiders. Another explanation theorizes that the children's disappearance could have been tied to disease, particularly the plague. In the Middle Ages, outbreaks of plague were frequent, claiming countless lives and often displacing communities. Some historians argue that the children the piper took away might refer metaphorically to those who died, or those who fled Hamelin during an epidemic. In this theory, the Pied Piper is a symbolic figure representing death. While compelling, this interpretation doesn't perfectly account for the specificity of the date, 1284, or the details about a single event that removed only the town's children. A separate theory suggests that the children left Hamelin in a mass migration, or children's crusade. Historians note that during the Middle Ages, there were instances of large groups leaving their hometowns en masse in search of better opportunities or in response to religious fervor. The Pied Piper, in this interpretation, could be a recruiter or locator from Eastern Europe, beckoning laborers or colonists. Indeed, parts of Eastern Europe were being resettled en masse by Germans at that time, a process known as Ostsiedlung. If this were the case, the Piper might have been a charismatic figure who convinced young people to start new lives elsewhere. Over time, the legend may have turned him into a mystical figure who spirited them away. Yet another perspective links the disappearance of the children to a possible military campaign. During the period in question, territorial conflicts were common, and mercenaries sometimes passed through towns promising wealth or glory to eager youths. Some scholars suggest that children could refer not only to those who were minors, but to younger adults who chose to follow a recruiter onto a battlefield or into another region. Under this theory, they may have been involved in a mass casualty event on a battlefield somewhere, leading to an entire generation of Hamelin youth being wiped out. And to put things in perspective, the town only had about 2,500 inhabitants around the year 1700. Though we don't have data for Hamelin's population in the 13th century, it may have been substantially less. Under this theory, then, a generation of youth could be as little as a few dozen boys going off to war and being eliminated or simply never returning. The Brothers Grimm helped immortalize the Pied Piper story in their collection of German legends, first published in the early 19th century. Their retelling solidified many of the details that we associate with it today: the bright clothing, the magic pipe, and the tragic betrayal by the townspeople. While their rendition is by no means a faithful historical record, it did capture the essence of local lore and passed it on to wider audiences. Yamashita's treasure refers to a legendary hoard of gold, precious stones, and other valuable artifacts that were looted by the Imperial Japanese Army across Southeast Asia. Many people believe these spoils were hidden in underground tunnels, caves, or other secret locations in the Philippines, under the command of General Tomoyuki Yamashita. The legend begins with the Imperial Japanese Army's systematic looting of gold, artwork, and other valuable resources in territories they occupied during the war. Japan's rapid expansion into China, the Philippines, and other parts of Southeast Asia led to the accumulation of large amounts of ill-gotten gains. It's often claimed that the war loot, stolen from banks, temples, churches, and private collections, was transported to the Philippines, allegedly due to its strategic location. According to popular lore, General Yamashita oversaw the concealment of this loot in a series of secret tunnels and bunkers carved into the rugged landscapes of the archipelago. General Yamashita was a highly respected officer in the Imperial Japanese Army who led successful campaigns in Malaya and Singapore. By the time he was tasked with defending the Philippines against Allied forces, Japan's fortunes in the war were in decline. There's no doubt that Yamashita was in the Philippines, but historians disagree on whether he personally supervised the hiding of looted valuables. Some insist he was too preoccupied with military matters to organize such an ambitious operation. Still, no reliable documentation has surfaced to prove that these caches were ever set up. After World War II ended, rumors about hidden Japanese loot began circulating in the Philippines almost immediately, leading to something of a mass hysteria about it. Local treasure hunters and foreign adventurers alike became fascinated by the idea of gold bars and gemstones stashed away in remote jungle caves. In the decades following the war, occasional finds were reported in newspapers, only to be dismissed upon further investigation. Perhaps the most famous case involved a Filipino locksmith named Rogelio Roxas. Roxas claimed, in 1971, to have discovered part of Yamashita's treasure, including a golden Buddha statue filled with gems. The subsequent controversy involved accusations of theft, the intervention of powerful political figures, and a lengthy court battle. Ferdinand Marcos, who ran the country as a dictatorship for a large part of his 20-year rule, is alleged to have sent government goons to confiscate the statue. However, his involvement in Yamashita's treasure allegedly goes much deeper than this. Some accounts assert that Marcos used his intelligence and military connections to locate portions of the rumored gold. Critics contend that he allegedly laundered or sold precious metal overseas, funding both personal and political ambitions. However, no concrete evidence has been presented to conclusively tie any part of Marcos's vast wealth to Yamashita's alleged hoard. Whether the treasure exists or not is still open for debate. However, I have to speculate that most individuals, on finding such treasure, would keep very quiet about it. The Sessho-seki, or killing stone, is an artifact in Japanese culture, intertwining history, mythology, and natural phenomena. The legend of the Sessho-seki centers around Tamamo no Mae, a beautiful and intelligent woman who served as a courtesan in the imperial court during the reign of Emperor Toba. Unbeknownst to many, she wasn't actually a human, but the clever disguise of a malevolent nine-tailed fox spirit known as a kitsune. Nine-tailed fox spirits represent the most powerful of these trickster spirits in traditional Japanese religion. According to the myth, Tamamo no Mae used her charm and wit to captivate the emperor, causing him to fall gravely ill. Court astrologers eventually discovered her true identity, leading to her fleeing into the wilderness. There she was ultimately slain, and her malevolent spirit transformed into the Sessho-seki, an evil rock and object of fear. The stone was believed to emit poisonous gases, killing anyone who approached it, thus earning its ominous name. In early March 2022, visitors to the site of the Sessho-seki discovered that the stone had split into two nearly equal parts. Some feared that the splitting of the stone signified the release of the fox spirit, potentially bringing misfortune. However, geological experts and local authorities suggested that natural weathering processes were the likely cause of the stone's fracture. Over time, exposure to the elements, including rain and temperature fluctuations, can create cracks in rocks. In the case of the Seki, water may have seeped into existing fissures, and during colder periods, the water could freeze and expand, exacerbating the cracks until the stone split. To err on the side of caution, the local government had Shinto priests sent out to appease and cleanse the ancient fox spirit, and thankfully, after March 2022, all was well in the world. The Plague of Athens, which broke out during the second year of the Peloponnesian War in 429 BC, stands as one of the most devastating epidemics to hit the ancient Greek world. It emerged in a city already under tremendous strain from a protracted conflict with Sparta, and it proceeded to kill a substantial portion of the Athenian population, including many of its leaders. As the disease ran rampant through the overcrowded city, it not only shattered the social fabric of Athens, but also dealt a crippling blow to the city's military and political fortunes. Prior to the outbreak, Athens and Sparta had been locked in a bitter struggle, with Athens relying on its naval power and the security of its fortified city walls to fend off Spartan land forces. With the countryside left abandoned so that the population could take refuge behind the city's walls, Athens had become extremely densely crowded. Poor sanitary conditions, coupled with the influx of refugees, created an ideal breeding ground for disease. It's not surprising that when the plague struck, it spread rapidly. Simply put, the city of Athens was a tinderbox, and the plague was the match that set it all ablaze. The timing was disastrous. The Athenians were banking on their strong naval presence to supply the city, so the Spartan army's ravaging of the surrounding farmland didn't force a capitulation. Yet, instead of famine or enemy swords, a microscopic foe made the city buckle. Thucydides, the great Athenian general and historian, documented the plague extensively in his work, History of the Peloponnesian War. He didn't just record political and military developments, he also carefully described the symptoms and social consequences of the outbreak. Many historians and physicians have turned to Thucydides' account in an attempt to identify the plague's exact cause. According to him, victims suffered sudden severe fever, redness, and inflammation of the eyes, and a bloody throat and tongue. They developed foul breath, violent sneezing, and coughing, followed by chest pain and severe gastrointestinal problems. Thucydides noted that those who survived often lost their fingers, toes, or eyesight, and became immune if exposed again. Such detailed observations, while invaluable, haven't provided a definitive answer for what this plague actually was. Over the centuries, suggestions have ranged from typhus to typhoid fever, smallpox, measles, or even hemorrhagic fever. Modern DNA analysis has helped narrow some possibilities. In 1994, excavations of a mass grave in the Kerameikos Cemetery in Athens uncovered teeth that were tested for pathogens. Scholars thought they had found genetic evidence pointing to typhoid fever, but subsequent analysis led to controversy, and no unanimous conclusion has been reached. The debate continues, reflecting just how challenging it can be to retroactively diagnose an ancient disease based on historical descriptions and incomplete archaeological evidence. Still, the leading hypothesis for many researchers remains typhoid fever, which is consistent with Thucydides' descriptions, especially given the sanitary conditions in besieged Athens. What isn't in doubt is the scale of the disaster. Estimates vary, but it's believed that the plague killed anywhere from 1/4 to 1/3 of the city's population. This had profound social and political repercussions. Athens had relied extremely heavily on its navy and on its democratic institutions. With so many citizens and rowers either dead or weakened, not only did the city's military capabilities suffer, but public morale plummeted. Ancient sources recount the breakdown of traditional religious and social norms. Many Athenians believed their gods had abandoned them, while according to Thucydides, others used the chaos as an opportunity to plunder and pursue personal gain. One of the most notable casualties of the plague was the great statesman Pericles. Under his leadership, Athens had flourished, building monumental structures like the Parthenon and achieving a golden age of philosophy, drama, and democracy. Pericles was also the architect of Athens' grand strategy in the Peloponnesian War. He chose to bring the countryside's inhabitants into the city and let Sparta ravage the land, rather than engage directly in a land battle that played to Spartan strengths. While this strategy may have been sound in purely military terms, it inadvertently created the conditions that facilitated the spread of the plague. His death not only deprived the city of a visionary leader, but also thrust Athens into a leadership crisis. Subsequent leaders couldn't match Pericles' prestige or political skill, and the city's policy became more erratic, contributing to internal divisions and ill-fated military ventures. The psychological toll was also immense. Thucydides described an atmosphere of fear and fatalism, as many believed death was inevitable once symptoms appeared. Funeral rites became impossible to carry out as usual, and bodies were thrown onto pyres, or left unburied in many cases. Notably, traditional Greek religion centered on proper burial rites to honor the dead and maintain favor with the gods. The inability to perform these rites shook people's faith and cultural identity, leaving them feeling untethered from the values and rituals that had long defined their community. In terms of historical significance, the plague of Athens can't be overlooked as a turning point in the Peloponnesian War. Initially, Athens had enjoyed a strategic advantage. Its walls and navy provided security and allowed for a focus on maritime power. However, after the plague, the morale and manpower of the city were severely diminished. Although the war dragged on for decades after, Athens never fully recovered the confidence and cohesion it had shown in the war's early years. The plague of Athens also contributed to a change in ethical thinking at the time. Athens was, as you may know, a great intellectual and cultural center of the ancient world. Faced with mass mortality and the breakdown of norms, people began to question the justness of the gods and the reliability of traditional moral codes. Thucydides noted a collapse of law and order, as those who believed they had little time left tried to enjoy every pleasure before succumbing to illness. This crisis of faith and ethics paved the way for philosophical inquiries that would dominate Greek thought for centuries to come. The Sophists, for instance, emerged with skepticism toward traditional values. In turn, thinkers like Socrates grappled with defining virtue in a world where conventional morality seemed to fail so easily. In the early 14th century, the Mali Empire was a dominant force in West Africa, renowned for its wealth, culture, and expansive trade networks. One of the most intriguing narratives from this period involves Mansa Abu Bakari II, who is said to have embarked on a transatlantic voyage. According to some, he potentially reached the Americas nearly 2 centuries before Christopher Columbus. The primary account of this expedition comes from the 14th century Arab historian al-Umari. He documented a conversation with Mansa Musa, Abu Bakari's successor, during Musa's pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324. According to al-Umari, Mansa Musa recounted that Abu Bakari II was fascinated by the Atlantic Ocean and sought to discover what lay beyond its horizon. He reportedly commissioned a fleet of 200 ships, instructing the captains to sail westward and return only after reaching the ocean's end or exhausting their provisions. After a long period, only one ship returned, with its captain describing a powerful current that swallowed the other vessels. Undeterred, Abu Bakari is said to have assembled an even larger fleet of 2,000 ships and personally led an expedition into the Atlantic, leaving Mansa Musa to govern in his absence. Neither Abu Bakari nor his fleet returned, and Mansa Musa ascended to the throne. The veracity of this account has been a subject of debate among historians. Some argue that the Mali Empire possessed the maritime capabilities and resources to undertake such a voyage. The empire's wealth, derived from gold and salt trade, could have financed large-scale expeditions. Additionally, they had access to numerous West African rivers, which facilitated internal trade and could have provided experience in navigation. However, oceanic navigation presents challenges distinct from river travel. There's no direct evidence to suggest that West African civilizations developed the necessary maritime technology for non-coastal oceanic travel. Proponents of the theory that Malians reached the Americas before Columbus point to various pieces of circumstantial evidence. Some suggest that certain cultural similarities between West African and indigenous American societies indicate pre-Columbian contact. For instance, similarities in pyramid construction and agricultural practices have been noted by proponents of this theory. However, these parallels can often be attributed to convergent evolution, the independent development of similar solutions to comparable challenges, rather than direct contact. Another argument centers on reports from Columbus himself. During his third voyage, Columbus noted that the indigenous people of the Americas possessed gold-tipped spears, which they claimed to have obtained from black traders who had come from the east. Some interpret this as evidence of African traders reaching the Americas. However, this account is ambiguous and doesn't conclusively point to transatlantic voyages by Malians. Skeptics highlight the lack of concrete archaeological evidence supporting the presence of West Africans in pre-Columbian America. No artifacts, settlements, or human remains definitively linked to Malians have been discovered in the Americas. Furthermore, the logistical challenges of such a voyage, that is to say, navigating the vast Atlantic without advanced maritime technology, would have been formidable. It's also worth noting that the story of Abu Bakari's voyage is primarily based on oral accounts and the writings of Arab historians, which were recorded decades after the events they describe. Oral traditions can be valuable historical sources, but are also susceptible to embellishment and distortion over time. Further calling the story into question is the fact that no Mansa named Abu Bakari II ever reigned in the Malian Empire. However, it's important to note that this doesn't necessarily mean that the story isn't true in and of itself, but rather that the Arab historian may have simply misremembered the name of the ruler. Notably, there was a previous ruler named Abu Bakr, which may have been the source of the confusion about this name. Aztlan, often referred to as the ancestral homeland of the Aztec people, remains one of history's enduring enigmas. Described in various Nahuatl legends, Aztlan is depicted as an island paradise, abundant in resources and surrounded by water. The term Aztlan translates to place of whiteness, or place of the heron, reflecting its association with herons and possibly white egrets. According to Aztec mythology, 7 tribes, collectively known as the Nahua people, resided in Chikamaztoc, the place of the 7 caves. Each cave represented a different tribe: the Xochimilca, Tlahuica, Acolua, Tlaxcalteca, Tepaneca, Chalca, and Mexica. These tribes eventually left Chikamaztoc and settled near Aztlan. The Mexica, who later became the Aztecs, were guided by their god Huitzilopochtli to leave Aztlan and embark on a journey that would lead them to the Valley of Mexico. This is where they founded Tenochtitlan in 1325 AD and later became known to history as the Aztecs. The exact location of Aztlan has been a subject of debate among historians and archaeologists. Some theories suggest it was situated in northwestern Mexico, possibly in the state of Nayarit. The island of Mexcaltitan de Uribe has been proposed as a potential site due to its resemblance to descriptions of Aztlan. Mexcaltitan is a small man-made island on Lake Mexcaltitan, featuring a circular layout with streets arranged in a grid pattern, similar to depictions of Aztlan. Other scholars have posited that Aztlan could be located in the southwestern United States, with some theories extending as far north as Utah. These hypotheses are based on linguistic and cultural similarities between the Aztecs and indigenous groups in these regions. However, no definitive archaeological evidence has been found to confirm these locations. The ambiguity surrounding Aztlan's location is compounded by the fact that it is primarily known through mythological narratives and codices, such as the Codex Boturini. These sources provide symbolic and allegorical descriptions rather than precise geographical information. Some scholars argue that Aztlan may not correspond to a real, physical location, but rather serves as a mythical origin story that underscores the Mexica's cultural identity and migration narrative. Despite numerous centuries of research, the true location of Aztlan, if it indeed existed at all, remains unverified. Longinus, often identified as the Roman soldier who pierced the side of Jesus Christ with a spear, has been shrouded in legend for centuries. Over time, this spear became known as the Spear of Destiny, Holy Lance, or Holy Spear, and it has served as a powerful symbol in medieval politics and modern myth-making. The story begins in the Gospel of John, where a Roman soldier pierces Jesus' side during the crucifixion to confirm his death. Although the soldier's name is not mentioned in Scripture, later tradition identified him as Gaius Cassius Longinus. Apocryphal texts, including the Gospel of Nicodemus, started to incorporate the soldier into theological narratives. By the 6th century, a significant set of myths had built up around him, and he was recognized in some Christian communities as Saint Longinus. Because the spear directly intersected with the final moments of Christ's life, it's believed to carry deep religious significance. Early Christians regarded relics associated with Christ's passion as especially sacred, so anything believed to have touched the Savior was revered. Legend held that the Spear of Destiny possessed mystical powers, conferring victory in battles and conquests upon those who wielded it. This notion took on political meaning as medieval rulers sought to legitimize their authority by obtaining the spear or claiming they possessed it. Throughout the Middle Ages, several European dynasties claimed ownership of the Holy Lance. One of the most famous relics associated with the spear was housed in the imperial treasury at Hofburg Palace in Vienna, Austria. This lance, sometimes identified as the Lance of Saint Maurice or the Imperial Lance, was connected to the coronations and reigns of Holy Roman emperors, who believed it was the genuine artifact. While some sources link it to Emperor Charlemagne, more reliable historical records connect it concretely to Emperor Otto the Great in the 10th century. However, the authenticity of such relics has always been questioned. The existence of multiple claimed holy lances complicates the matter. Aside from the Vienna lance, other spearheads revered as the Spear of Destiny include one in the Vatican and one in the treasury of the Armenian Apostolic Church. Each claimant insists that their relic has the strongest historical or spiritual case, but rigorous scientific testing has been limited. Metallurgical examinations on the Vienna lance suggest it contains material from the 7th century or later, which would cast doubt on its direct connection to the time of Christ. However, it's important to note that even legitimate relics degrade over time and have to be repaired. It re-emerged into popular culture with rumors of a certain German leader's interest in occult artifacts during World War II. According to certain accounts, he was captivated by legends claiming that whoever possessed the Spear of Destiny would control world events. He allegedly sought to obtain it from Vienna's Hofburg Museum after Germany annexed Austria in 1938. Yet, some historians argue that while the Germans confiscated numerous cultural treasures, the leaders' obsession with the spear might have been exaggerated by post war authors. After the war, there was a strong desire to dramatize the German regime's connection to the occult. Despite the pop culture associations, there's no conclusive documentation proving a personal, sustained fixation by the leader of Germany on the Spear of Destiny. Regardless of authenticity, the Spear of Destiny's real power may lie in its storytelling potential. From early Christian apocrypha to medieval court ceremonies, it's been a tangible link to the sacred past, helping believers feel connected to Christ's sacrifice. For rulers, it was a potent political symbol, signifying divine sanction of their reign. And in modern culture, the spear continues to fascinate. It appears in everything from movies to novels to comic books, where it's invested with fantastic powers and the ability to shape world events. These fictional retellings often highlight a common human tendency, the desire for objects that grant supernatural authority and control. Today, the question of whether any of these spearheads is truly the one that pierced Christ remains formally unanswered. Scholars and theologians maintain a very healthy amount of skepticism. It's entirely possible, maybe even probable, that none of the relics are genuine, given the difficulty of tracing provenance back to the 1st century. The Shah dynasty, traditionally regarded as China's first dynasty, occupies a unique and significant position in Chinese cultural history. Believed to have ruled from approximately 2070 BC to 1600 BC, the Shah is often presented as a pivotal foundational period, predating the well-documented Shang and Zhou dynasties. However, the question of whether the Shah dynasty was a historical reality or a mythological construct remains a subject of ongoing debate among scholars. The Shah dynasty holds an esteemed place in traditional Chinese historiography. It's portrayed as the first hereditary dynasty in Chinese history, marking a significant transition from the semi-mythical era of sage kings to a structured and centralized state system. Ancient texts like the records of the Grand Historian by Sima Qian, written in the 2nd century BC, describe the dynasty as having been founded by Yu the Great. Yu is lauded for his extraordinary engineering achievements, particularly his success in controlling the devastating floods of the Yellow River. This is a deadly natural phenomenon that profoundly influenced Chinese civilization. The Shah is credited with introducing early forms of political organization, including hereditary succession and a rudimentary bureaucracy. These are two of the major elements that would later underpin the governance of subsequent Chinese dynasties. Beyond its administrative role, the Shah dynasty has a profound cultural significance. Its story is imbued with values central to Chinese identity, such as filial piety, meritocracy, and harmony with nature, aligning closely with Confucian ideals. As the purported beginning of historical Chinese civilization, the Shah provides a sense of continuity, linking the mythical origins of Chinese society to historically documented dynasties. Although the Shah dynasty's historicity has been a matter of debate, certain strands of evidence lend credence to its existence as a historical reality. Among the most compelling pieces of evidence are archaeological discoveries that align with the timeline and descriptions of the Shah dynasty. The Erlitou culture, discovered in Henan province and dated to approximately 1900 to 1500 BC, is frequently associated with the Shah. The remains at the Erlitou site reveal evidence of urbanization, bronze metallurgy, and social stratification, all indicative of a complex and hierarchical society consistent with an early state. Notably, archaeological continuity was observed between the Erlitou culture and the Shang dynasty, which is the first Chinese dynasty that's universally accepted by historians. The Shang appears to have emerged from a cultural and technological foundation akin to that found at Erlitou. This continuity suggests the existence of a preceding centralized polity that bridged the gap between Neolithic cultures and the Shang dynasty. Some also argue the Shah narrative aligns with patterns of early state formation observed in other river valley civilizations, such as those in Mesopotamia and Egypt. These civilizations often developed centralized political systems as a response to environmental and economic pressures. The Shah's story fits into this broader global pattern, lending plausibility to the idea of its historicity. Additionally, some details from ancient texts, such as Yu the Great's flood control efforts, find parallels in archaeological evidence of water management systems in the Yellow River Basin. These overlaps between textual and physical evidence strengthen the argument for the Shah's existence. Despite the evidence supporting the Shah dynasty's historicity, significant challenges remain. Critics argue that the Shah is more a product of myth and political ideology than a reflection of historical reality. A key weakness in the case for the Shah's historicity is the absence of contemporary written records. Unlike the Shang dynasty, which left behind an extensive corpus of oracle bones and inscriptions, the Shah has no direct written evidence to corroborate its existence. All accounts of the Shah come from texts compiled many centuries or even millennia after its supposed era, raising serious doubts about their reliability. Furthermore, many elements of the dynasty narrative bear strong mythological overtones. Yu the Great, the founder of the dynasty, is depicted as possessing superhuman abilities, particularly in his ability to tame floods through sheer determination and divine support. These qualities place him in the realm of mythical heroes rather than historical figures. The seamless transition from the legendary sage kings, such as Yao and Shun, to Yu and the Shah dynasty suggests a continuation of mythological storytelling. The political motives of later historians further cloud the Shah's historicity. The story of the Shah gained prominence during the Zhou dynasty, running from 1046 to 256 BC, a period when legitimizing hereditary rule was critical for maintaining authority. The Zhou rulers may have retroactively constructed the Shah narrative as a precedent to justify their own rule, presenting themselves as rightful inheritors of a divinely sanctioned mandate. The records of the Grand Historian, while an invaluable historical resource, frequently blends myth with documented history, reflecting the ideological aims of its time. Even the archaeological evidence linking the Shah to the Erlitou culture is not definitive. While the Erlitou site demonstrates the characteristics of an advanced society, there's no explicit evidence tying it to a centralized Shah state. Some scholars argue that Erlitou represents an early phase of the Shang dynasty, or an independent polity unrelated to the Shah. The debate over the Shah dynasty's existence reflects broader issues in the interpretation of Chinese history. Regardless of its historical authenticity, the Shah narrative serves essential ideological and cultural functions. It acts as a foundational myth, establishing the concept of the mandate of heaven, a key political philosophy that legitimized the rise and fall of rulers based on their moral conduct. The Shah's story provides a framework for understanding the cyclical nature of Chinese dynastic rule, illustrating the consequences of virtuous and corrupt governance. In addition to its ideological significance, the Shah plays a vital role in fostering national identity. It reinforces a sense of historical continuity and cultural uniqueness, portraying China as a civilization with deep and enduring roots. In modern times, the Shah dynasty is frequently invoked as part of the 5,000 years of Chinese history narrative, emphasizing China's status as one of the world's oldest civilizations. Peking Man, a crucial discovery in the history of human evolution, was found in the Zhoukoudian cave system near Beijing during the 1920s and 1930s. These fossils, dubbed Peking Man, have become one of the most significant paleoanthropological finds. The first discovery at Zhoukoudian was made in 1921 when a human tooth was unearthed by Austrian paleontologist Otto Zadansky. Further excavations revealed an array of fossils, including skull fragments, jaws, and limb bones, belonging to more than 40 individuals. These remains were eventually classified as Homo erectus pekinensis, a subspecies of Homo erectus that lived roughly between 200 and 800,000 years ago. These fossils showed that Peking man had a brain capacity smaller than modern humans but larger than earlier hominids. The Zhoukoudian site yielded over 100,000 stone tools, evidence of fire use, and possible signs of communal living. These findings suggested that Peking man was a hunter-gatherer with the ability to adapt to the harsh conditions of northern China during the glacial periods. Despite ongoing debates, it is widely believed that these early humans had some form of social structure and were capable of controlling fire. In 1941, with the Japanese invasion of China escalating, there was a growing concern for the safety of the Peking man fossils. American and Chinese scientists decided to transport the fossils to the United States for safekeeping. They packed the fossils into 2 large crates, which were supposed to be shipped from the Marine base at Qinhuangdao to the U.S. The crates disappeared en route, and their fate has remained one of the great mysteries in the field of paleoanthropology. Multiple theories have surfaced over the years. One conspiracy theory, particularly popular in China but not well known in the West, is the idea that the Peking man fossils showed humanity arose out of China rather than out of Africa. This conspiracy theory generally suggests that the bones were intentionally destroyed by Japanese or American agents to cover up this fact. One other theory suggests that the crates were lost at sea after the ship transporting them was sunk by a submarine. Another posits that the crates were captured by Japanese soldiers and the bones either destroyed or lost in the chaos of war. Under this theory, the soldiers who captured the bones really didn't know what they had on their hands. Yet another theory, spurred by an account from the son of a U.S. Marine, suggests that the bones may still be buried beneath a parking lot in Qinhuangdao. The Peking man fossil's disappearance has led to a slew of investigations, with some involving official agencies like the FBI. Despite numerous expeditions and studies, the actual location of the fossils remains unknown. The story of Apache, a reputed female Vietnamese sniper during the Vietnam War, has become one of the Vietnam War's greatest historical mysteries. She's often cited in connection with the legendary U.S. Marine sniper Carlos Hathcock, who claimed to have encountered and ultimately eliminated her. Yet much debate surrounds whether she was a historical individual, a composite figure, or perhaps even a complete fiction. While there's widespread anecdotal evidence in Western sources, especially among American veterans, the lack of verifiable Vietnamese records has led some to question her existence. Hathcock alleged that Apache was a skilled Viet Cong sniper, known for her brutality, including the torture of captured Marines. According to his recollection, this female fighter earned the nickname Apache because of her penchant for mutilating American prisoners. Critics point out that first-hand documentation of Apache's existence remains elusive outside of oral testimony and veteran anecdotes. If she really had been a high-profile Viet Cong sniper, there might have been at least some formal records from the North Vietnamese. Historians have noted that the People's Army of Vietnam tended to keep fairly detailed records, including information about decorated snipers and specialized units. However, the Viet Cong, while fighting under the direction of North Vietnam, wasn't officially part of the People's Army of Vietnam. Further, the Viet Cong was composed of regular units, which may have had better record keeping, and guerrilla units, which almost certainly didn't. Skeptics argue that if she were as infamous as described, there should be at least some trace in Vietnamese archives. Further, they argue that if she had existed, she would have been lauded by the North Vietnamese for propaganda purposes. On the other hand, defenders of the historical Apache theory point to the nature of guerrilla warfare. The Viet Cong operated in covert cells, with fighters often using pseudonyms to hide their identities from both the enemy and even their allies, if operational security demanded it. Under such conditions, it's plausible that a female sniper could have operated without leaving an extensive paper trail. Moreover, the massive destruction and confusion that accompanied the Vietnam War might mean that some documentation, if it ever existed, was destroyed or lost. This argument suggests that the absence of evidence is not definitive proof of her non-existence. Also, according to the official narrative, she was a figure deeply feared by the Americans that was killed in action. Any acknowledgement of this would have had the potential to damage North Vietnamese and Viet Cong morale. Beyond the question of official documentation, some argue that cultural and political motives could also explain why Vietnamese records remain silent about an infamous female sniper. In post-war Vietnam, narratives about female fighters often highlighted revolutionary heroism and sacrifice. It's true that women played significant roles, both overt and covert, in the war. However, the story of a female fighter who engaged in torturous behavior might not align with the idealized depiction of female revolutionaries in official accounts. Hence, it's possible that even if a female sniper committed such acts, her story wouldn't be included in state-sanctioned narratives that emphasize moral righteousness and heroic conduct. Further, there's nothing in Hathcock's story that suggests that she was a particularly prolific sniper. Her reputation was because of the horrible acts she committed against prisoners of war. Again, the Vietnamese may not have wished to play up the role of such an individual in the post-war period, especially given attempts to normalize relations with America. There's also the perspective that Apache might have been a symbolic figure, or even an amalgamation of multiple female snipers. Some veterans have suggested that stories about Apache circulated as a means of personifying the fear and anger many Marines felt when confronted with a savage battlefield. War, with its countless rumors and secondhand stories, can inflate real events into powerful legends. It's not uncommon for a single, tangible enemy combatant to become a boogeyman figure, someone who encapsulates the worst fears and horrors of conflict. The psychological impact of facing an adversary reputed to be exceptionally cruel could have enhanced her legend over time. Meanwhile, those who served with Carlos Hathcock remained steadfast that Apache was, in fact, a real person. According to multiple eyewitness accounts, Hathcock became determined to take her out after witnessing the brutal torture she supposedly inflicted on captive Marines. In the well-known telling, he successfully eliminated her at a distance of over 700 yards, ending her reign of terror. Further, and importantly, his spotter verified the reality of the event itself, though couldn't directly verify who the woman was. While this anecdote relies heavily on personal testimonies, supporters say the consistency of these accounts lends credibility to the story. Still, from a strictly historical standpoint, anecdotal evidence alone can't serve as conclusive proof. Oral testimonies are subject to memory lapses, exaggerations, and the influence of retelling across decades. Further, Carlos Hathcock is in essence a mythic figure in his own right, and people like this have the tendency to have a reality-altering aura surrounding them. The mystery of Apache boils down to a clash between the fog of war and the rigid demands of historical proof. On one hand, the anecdotal evidence, especially from Carlos Hathcock and various Marine veterans, suggests she was a real fearsome female Viet Cong sniper. On the other, a lack of verifiable documentation raises legitimate doubts, and it's no secret that war stories can morph into legend over time. Given what we know, there's enough credibility in those first-hand accounts to keep her story alive. Whether Apache was one woman or an amalgamation of multiple female fighters, one thing's clear. The allure of her legend captures the raw and brutal nature of the Vietnam War. She might be more myth than fact, but that very uncertainty is what makes her tale endure, as it did when her specter haunted American servicemen like Carlos Hathcock. Emperor Nero, who reigned from 54 AD to 68 AD, is one of the most controversial figures in Roman history. In ancient sources, he's universally portrayed as an evil tyrant at worst, and a self-absorbed artist at best. One of the difficulties with examining Nero, as you'll see, is that all the primary sources which have survived are extremely biased against him. Whether this is an accurate reflection of his character or not has been heavily debated by modern scholars, who tend to view him more favorably than ancient writers. When examining Nero's demise, we're confronted with conflicting ancient reports and modern theories that vary on how and why he died. In order to understand the complex situation that led to Nero's demise, it's important to consider the political and familial background of his rise to power. Nero, born Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, was connected to the Julio-Claudian dynasty as the son of Agrippina the Younger, who was the sister of Emperor Caligula. After Emperor Claudius married Nero's mother Agrippina in 49, he adopted him, and he then became known as Nero Claudius Caesar Drusus Germanicus. Upon Claudius's death in 54 AD, Nero, only 16 or 17 at the time, ascended to the imperial throne. For the first few years of Nero's rule, governance was largely influenced by others. Particularly influential were his mother Agrippina, the philosopher-statesman Seneca the Younger, and the Praetorian prefect Sextus Afranius Burrus. Initially, Nero was praised for being a merciful and kind ruler. However, tensions arose between him and Agrippina, and suspicions surrounded Agrippina's potential involvement in Claudius's death. Over time, Nero distanced himself from his mother's counsel and potentially arranged for her slaying in 59 AD. By the mid-60s, Nero's popularity among the Roman aristocracy, and potentially even among the general Roman citizenry, began to wane. His extravagant building projects, such as the Domus Aurea, were financed by heavy taxes and contributed to dissatisfaction among the elite. Furthermore, Nero's personal obsession with artistic pursuits and public performances scandalized many who believed an emperor should maintain Roman dignity. Appearing on stage and competing in Greek-style games was viewed as a public disgrace. Simultaneously, dissent was brewing in the provinces, which had become increasingly influential as the Roman Empire grew and expanded. The infamous Great Fire of Rome in 64 led to rumors that Nero either started the fire himself or failed to suppress it in a timely manner. Though historians differ on the extent of Nero's involvement, the rumor that he, quote, fiddled while Rome burned persists in popular consciousness. In the aftermath, Nero's construction of a lavish palace on land cleared by the fire fanned the flames of discontent. By 65, the so-called Pisonian conspiracy sought to overthrow Nero and install Gaius Calpurnius Piso as emperor. Although the plot was uncovered and ruthlessly suppressed, paranoia grew around Nero's administration. His trust in the Senate and other elites further eroded. When further rebellions broke out in provinces like Gaul and Spain, Nero tried to quash them, but the tide was turning. But let's get down to the mystery here. How exactly did Nero die? Ancient sources generally agree on one key point. Nero died in June 68, at about 30 years old. However, interpretations of what precisely happened in his final hours vary among the three main ancient historians who wrote about him: Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio. Tacitus, in his Annals, depicts Nero as isolated and desperate. He writes that the Senate had declared him a public enemy, and that Nero feared torture and humiliation if captured. With the Praetorian Guard deserting him, Nero fled Rome for a villa outside the city. In a state of panic and learning that his enemies were closing in, he reportedly had his secretary, Epaphroditus, help him end himself. Notably, in this account, Tacitus humiliates Nero one last time by portraying him as too unmanly and dishonorable to carry out this grim task himself. In the Lives of the 12 Caesars, Suetonius largely corroborates Tacitus's version, but includes some dramatic details. For instance, according to this account, his primary concern about his own demise is the loss for the art world, not the impact upon the Roman people or the Roman state. Cassius Dio similarly recounts that Nero's last moments were self-absorbed. Like Suetonius, he notes that Nero's final words lamented the loss of his artistic legacy and what he could have accomplished had he lived. Although most traditional texts suggest that Nero did indeed die in 68 AD, there were rumors of his survival that developed into something of a mass hysteria, if ancient sources are believed. Some ancient writers mention a phenomenon known as the Nero redivivus, meaning Nero reborn, legend. It held that Nero wasn't really dead and would return to reclaim the throne. Three major false Neros emerged over the next 2 decades, garnering varying degrees of support before they were put down or exposed as fakes. The survival rumor, while popular in antiquity, is almost universally rejected by modern scholars. However, there's always the extremely slim possibility that Nero did manage to escape and live out his life quietly. Notably, early Christian communities believed that Nero was the Antichrist, which fueled belief that he would return with a vengeance. Modern historians generally accept the ancient testimony that Nero was responsible for his own demise, but they diverge on the precise motivations and surrounding factors. One debate concerns whether Nero's act was truly voluntary. Another modern perspective focuses on the chain of events leading up to his death. The revolts in Gaul, Spain, and Africa may have accelerated his downfall beyond the point of rescue. Some historians have questioned whether the Senate's declaration of Nero as a public enemy was enough legal impetus to push him towards finishing himself off rather than fighting. According to contemporary Roman law, once declared a public enemy, any citizen could be slain with impunity. Seizure of property and humiliating execution were standard punishments if the captured person was an emperor no longer protected by the throne. If Nero believed he'd face public execution, it's plausible he realized that he had to take matters into his own hands as a final means to control his destiny. Others have explored more conspiratorial angles, such as the possibility that Nero was slain by loyalists who sought to prevent a worse fate for him. Under this theory, Nero is essentially thought of as so incompetent that he couldn't read the writing on the wall, so his retainers had to take matters into their own hands. Upon Nero's death, chaos enveloped the empire. Galba, the governor of Hispania, now part of modern Spain, marched on Rome and assumed the title of emperor. But his reign was extremely short-lived. He was quickly overthrown by Otho, who was then replaced by Vitellius, and ultimately Vespasian took control in 69 AD, a year known as the Year of the Four Emperors. Can we draw a conclusion on what actually happened to Nero with absolute certainty? We'll never know the exact circumstances of Nero's final moments, because every ancient source was so deeply biased against him. Yet despite this bias, the most plausible explanation still remains that he chose to go out on his own. In the end, his demise is lost in the fog of rumor, propaganda, speculation, and Roman high drama. Perhaps this uncertainty is eminently fitting for a Roman emperor who would have rather had the life of an actor or musician than a statesman. High Brazil has captured imaginations for almost a millennium. Often described as a mythical or phantom island located west of Ireland, it's said to be cloaked in mist, except for one day every 7 years, when it becomes visible, yet still unreachable. The earliest known cartographic evidence of High Brazil appears on a Venetian map by Andrea Bianco in 1436, where a small island named Insula de Brasil is shown to the west of Ireland. Subsequent Renaissance-era maps generally included a similar island. In 1480, a group of sailors set off in search of the island, though there's no clear evidence from the time as to what they found. However, in 1497, a Spanish diplomat wrote that John Cabot and his crew had stopped over on the island and saw evidence that it had previously been discovered. By the 16th and 17th centuries, High Brazil became more frequently featured in sea charts, though its location varied from one map to another. In some accounts, the island was rumored to be a place of immense wealth and perfection, drawing parallels with other legendary realms like Atlantis. Many of the oldest narratives about High Brazil stem from Irish folklore, which include the idea of the island having an advanced or even magical civilization. Gerald of Wales, active during the 12th and 13th centuries, while not directly referencing High Brazil, wrote about strange islands off the coast of Ireland in his Topographia Hibernica. In 1684, Irish historian Roderick O'Flaherty described sightings of a mysterious island that occasionally appeared off the Irish coast. Despite its status as a phantom island, there have been purported eyewitness accounts even into the modern era. One of the most famous claims about High Brazil allegedly occurred in 1674 when a Captain John Nisbet reportedly came ashore on High Brazil. According to this often repeated story, the captain described encountering large black rabbits and a mysterious wizard living in a stone castle. Unfortunately, what many sources fail to state is that John Nisbet wasn't a real person, but a character from a novel intended to read as a historical travelogue. In modern times, some theorists speculate that High Brazil might be a misidentification of existing maritime features. For instance, the Porcupine Bank, a raised seabed region west of Ireland, occasionally has shallow waters that could, in theory, appear as an island in certain tidal conditions. During extreme low tides or under unusual atmospheric refraction effects, parts of the bank might become briefly visible, sparking sightings. This phenomenon, combined with the propensity for sailors to perpetuate maritime myths, might have kept the tradition of High Brazil alive. On the flip side, modern marine exploration has largely dispelled the notion of an uncharted island off the Irish coast. With advancements in satellite imaging, hydrographic surveys, and global mapping technologies, any significant landmass protruding above sea level would certainly have been documented. Detailed maps of the Atlantic seafloor around Ireland show no undiscovered islands within the region where High Brazil is typically placed. In a similar vein, any repeated sightings of High Brazil could be attributed to optical illusions, such as a fata morgana, a type of mirage that distorts distant objects or even the horizon line. In short, High Brazil is likely a classic example of a myth rooted in equal parts genuine maritime curiosity and good old-fashioned tall tales. The Porcupine Bank could have sparked initial sightings under rare tidal or atmospheric conditions. These were then blended with centuries-old Irish legends to create a timeless, phantom island. Chartmakers wove it into their maps, storytellers embellished it with riches and wizards, and sailors' yarns kept the lore alive for generations. But modern technology, satellite imaging, detailed hydrographic surveys, show there's simply no hidden island off Ireland's coast. Zerzura is portrayed as a lost oasis city hidden amid the vast expanse of the Sahara Desert, captivating explorers and historians for centuries. It's said to be a city of white walls, guarded by black stone giants, and home to untold treasures. The earliest written references to Zerzura appear in medieval Arabic manuscripts. In these stories, Zerzura was depicted as a place where the houses were white, the gates were carved with mysterious symbols, and an abundance of water and date palms could be found. The manuscripts also mentioned a sleeping king and queen and hint that the city might hide valuable relics or artifacts. However, these early references often clearly contain heavily legendary material, leaving us to wonder how much truth lies in the accounts. During the 1920s and 1930s, interest in Zerzura skyrocketed when European explorers roamed the desert in search of the legendary city. Major Ralph Bagnold, who led expeditions in the Egyptian and Libyan deserts, helped establish the Zerzura Club, with fellow adventurers who were obsessed with uncovering the oasis. Armed with camels and early vehicles, these explorers scoured remote corners of the Sahara, braving harsh winds and unforgiving temperatures. Many reported finding signs of ancient rivers, dried lake beds, and rock art, but none returned with definitive proof of Zerzura itself. One theory suggests that the legend of Zerzura may stem from real-life desert oases that were once thriving, but later lost to shifting sands and changing climates. For instance, some point to the presence of the Kufra oasis in Libya, which could have fueled stories of a hidden paradise among the dunes. Others have speculated that the city might be a confusion of multiple remote oases, which medieval traders and explorers encountered, creating a kind of patchwork tale. Furthermore, geological changes over centuries might have buried once lush valleys, adding to the allure of a fabled lost city. Critics of the Zerzura legend assert that the city's repeated mention in tales of lost treasure and supernatural guardians reveals more about human imagination than ancient history. They argue that explorers' fascination with discovering the unknown likely fueled exaggerations and tall tales over the years. For them, Zerzura symbolizes our innate desire to believe in hidden wonders just out of reach. Indeed, many lost city legends, like El Dorado in South America or the Seven Cities of Gold in North America, have proven to be more mythological than real. Still, the Sahara is enormous, and there's a chance that traces of once thriving communities have yet to be uncovered.